Okay, let's start this drawing. So what I'm going to be doing today is I really like the pose of Yusuke on the right over in the subview window. And I want to draw that pose, but I'd like to draw Yusuke in his dark tournament outfit. So today what I'm going to be doing is trying to replicate the same pose, but put Yusuke in his dark tournament outfit. So what I'm starting to do here is I'm just taking my time drawing out the pose with simple shapes and then like a rough haircut for Yusuke just to get a feel of what I want to achieve here. And you're also going to notice in the drawing I'm playing with the idea of trying to have Yusuke use his spirit gun instead of doing the shotgun punch. And you're going to see me kind of messing with this as I go through the entire drawing because I wasn't sure which pose I was going to end up going with. And you'll see at the end of the drawing which one I picked. One thing that I'm going to want to highlight just really quick is on the right over here, this subview window. And you can see in the subview window, I've loaded into it a bunch of reference images of Yusuke Urameshi. I've got Yusuke in his green school uniform. I've got Yusuke in his dark tournament outfit. I've also got different angles of Yusuke and different close-ups, some with the hair down and some with the hair slicked back. And this is just really the easiest way for me to look at reference drawings instead of what I used to do, which was I used to print out a bunch of images of the character I was trying to draw and just kind of look to the side of my computer and keep referring to the images that way. But in Clip Studio Paint, having this subview window is amazing because it first of all allows me to not have to print out and waste a bunch of paper and ink, but it also just makes it much easier and much more streamlined to be like, okay, these are the images I want to refer to. They're right here on the right. I can cycle through them as I'm doing the drawing. And it just makes it a lot easier for me to not only focus on the drawing, but also even do things as far as what is the exact color I'm trying to do. Because in the little window there's a dropper, and you can actually pick the exact colors that you want to use when you're coloring. You'll see me do this later when I get into the coloring part of the drawing. But it's one of my favorite tools in Clip Studio Paint. Another thing I'd like to get into, you can see as I'm progressing through this drawing, that right arm is giving me a lot of trouble. And what I mean by that is I am trying to play around with it, see if I can get it into a cool pose, and maybe try to be a little bit different than the reference image over on the right. So here I'm like, all right, what if I did the hand kind of in front of his face, like he's about to charge up the spirit gun and shoot it? I didn't like the way it looked at all. So then I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go back to what I originally had planned. You can see here though, as I'm drawing this arm out, it looks weird. So then I change it up again and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have the right arm pointing straight out like he's about to fire the spirit gun. Then I realized the left arm, the way it was positioned, didn't look dynamic enough, especially if I'm trying to make it look how it looks over on the right. So I'm using the lasso tool to not only change the arm positioning but adjust the way the legs are. And I'm trying to I want it to look dynamic. I don't want this positioning to look static. That will make the drawing not feel professional. And even though I'm an amateur artist, I strive to improve my skills to one day be professional level. So I'm always trying to challenge myself, and I'm always checking the drawing and saying, does this look good enough? And I am a perfectionist, so that's something about me that I definitely bring into my art. But I think it's good to be that way just because you need to always be improving. And I'm somebody who always believes in, well, my newest drawing should be the best drawing I've ever done. And if it's not, I'm annoyed at myself about it. So I'm kind of just continuing here to feel out the drawing. And what I mean by that is to just kind of try to definitively figure out, what am I going to do here? how am I going to pose this? And I'm also thinking about other things, like what kind of background am I going to do, and how am I going to color that? Where do I want to add texture effects? How do I want the hair to look? Where am I going to add the little detail lines like you see here? One of the other things I want to talk a little bit about is all the different tools that I use in digital art that I like better than traditional drawing. One of those I'm doing as we speak here, which is using the power of layers. So when I draw something on paper normally, I typically draw with a harder stroke than I probably should. And it's something I've always done since I was a little kid. I know you're supposed to draw very lightly so that way you can erase and then redraw over it. I did this for years. I find it to be incredibly messy. So the beauty of digital art is I can just draw an entire layer, and then I can go over to the right, all the way over to the right, where you see there's a bunch of different layers. You can click on the layer, you can change the opacity to like 50%, 70, 20, whatever you want, and then I can just draw over it again. So typically my flow of how I do things is I draw the layer, and then I make it the opacity around 50%, and then I'll draw over it again and just kind of be like, well, let me just build on what I already did instead of erasing. So you'll see me use the undo button a lot. I occasionally use the eraser, but I don't use it as much as obviously I would if I was drawing it on traditional paper. I also like to use the lasso a lot. The lasso is a lifesaver because sometimes many artists, including myself, will struggle with the way the proportion should be on something. So if I draw a hand, for example, and I really like the way the hand looks, but then I realize it's not in proportion, I can just go into that layer, use the lasso to surround the part that I want to change, and then I can just change the size of it. So I like to use these tools. I think they're super helpful and can be a lifesaver and a time saver, honestly. And when you factor in how long it takes to do a drawing, take this drawing for example. So when I drew this, I did a time lapse on my camera, and the time lapse was set to be ×5. So the drawing, according to the length of the time lapse when I was done, was 1 hour and 14 minutes. So it really took me over 5 hours to do this drawing completely from start to finish. Keep in mind, that's not like 5 hours straight through in one sitting. I can draw for maybe 2 hours to 3 hours at most at one given time, and that's either because like my attention span doesn't allow for me to draw more than that, or something as simple as my computer runs out of battery and I have to charge it, so then I take a break. But a drawing like this, I have learned that I need to draw a little bit, stop for the day, and then I review the drawing, figure out what I don't like about it, and then I come back to it the next day or 2 days after and add to it. When I was younger, when I first started really getting serious about my drawing hobby, I would draw things and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna draw this whole thing and color it by the end of today. And what I found is that makes me rush the project so much, and the quality is less when I do it that way. So I find that when I break it up into little pieces of a project and then build on it, the finished project, I'm much more happy with it. I'm continuing to work on the posing, trying to make it as dynamic as possible, and especially if you look at the right arm, I've finally got the perspective looking somewhat how I want it to, and the proportions seem correct to me. Adding a little bit of detail here, playing around with maybe putting a rip in the shirt, and then adjusting the left arm. Trying to add some little details in here. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep those yet, just kind of trying to feel it out, see what everything's going to look like. A little work on the hands. And hands, you know, they can be very challenging to draw. I think most artists would tell you that drawing hands is one of the hardest things to do, and that's certainly the case for me. Speaking of hands, you'll see I just erased it, but I had a spirit gun hand out over as an outlier there on the left side of the page. And that's because I wasn't sure if I was gonna continue with this exact pose or if I was gonna mess around with maybe doing the spirit gun again. So throughout this drawing, you'll kind of see me keep teetering back and forth on if I'm gonna do this pose or that pose, as I kind of try to work through it. Another Clip Studio Paint thing I wanted to talk about just from earlier, when I was talking about layers and doing a layer and then making it transparent and drawing over it, I wanted to make sure I was clear. So when I'm drawing, I use vector layers. And the reason I use vector layers is because with a vector layer, you can transform it, where you can, you know, adjust the line, make it thicker if you wanted to, add line weight and all those things. You can also use the lasso, highlight something, and make it bigger or smaller. So that's why I use vector lines, or vector layers, rather, for drawing my line art. And then I'll use raster layers actually to color things. So now I'm at the point where I'm trying to add some more details. There's some ripping at the sleeves there on the shirt, putting folds into the shirt. I've got the wristbands with a little wear and tear on them like Yusuke would have it. I'm trying to figure out here how I want to do this belt. Admittedly, I tried to make the belt look more like how I would do it if it was a Dragon Ball style drawing, just because the type of belt that Yusuke is wearing is very similar to any kind of martial arts belt that you would find in Dragon Ball. Same kind of thing with the pants. I mean, I know it's not just Dragon Ball, it's just in general anime inspired, but I'm so heavily influenced by Dragon Ball that I always think to that first, even when I draw musculature and detail work. Now I want to talk about Yusuke's facial expression that I went with here. And we all know Yusuke's a very fiery personality, so I think it'd be best to have Yusuke, in his own words, explain the facial expression I went for in this drawing. Take it away, Yusuke. Kuwabara! And there's Justin Cook, just being an absolute legend as the voice actor for Yusuke Urameshi on this series. And Justin was an amazing lead for this series and this anime. This anime is great because it's got a lot of awesome things going for it. It's got a great story, it's got great characters, great fight scenes, and great art. But it also, and maybe the most importantly, has an amazing voice cast. You've got Justin Cook as Yusuke Urameshi, the legendary Christopher Sabat as Kuwabara, John Bergmeyer as Kurama, Chuck Huber as Hiei, and the fantastic Linda Young as Master Genkai. These actors really elevate this story to the next level with their vocal performances. They all do an amazing job, and they also have a really, really good soundtrack for this series. So, in my opinion, I would rank Yu Yu Hakusho in my top 3, if not top 2, behind Dragon Ball. It's just that good. My brothers and I always talk about how much of a masterpiece this series is. So, if you've never seen the anime, I would highly suggest you watch it if you're a fan of anime. It really is worth it. And speaking of the anime itself, I actually just got the box set of Yu Yu Hakusho on Blu-ray a few months back, and the cool thing about it is there's I believe, 2 OVAs, or from what I understand, is the same thing as a special that is finally English dubbed with the English dub cast that I was just talking about. And I've never seen those before, so I've been actually waiting until my brothers and I can all watch them together, since we're all such big fans of the show. I wanted to wait for them and enjoy that as a group. I think that'd be pretty cool, especially because I discovered this series with my 2 brothers when we were younger kids. We saw this originally when it aired on Toonami in 2003. I think it was on right after Dragon Ball Z at the time. And we loved the whole shonen fight type anime. So as soon as we started watching this, we were like, oh, this is great. There's so many cool fights and all that kind of stuff. So we were immediately hooked. And one of the things that I think really shines about this series is the fact that even though Yusuke is the main character and he does have a lot of the best moments in the show, he's arguably, if not the most powerful character in the show, they do a really good job of giving everybody their due. And what I mean by that is, if we're going to compare it to something like Dragon Ball Z, it's mostly the Goku show, if not the Saiyan show, where once the Saiyans are introduced, the rest of the Z fighters like Krillin, Yamcha, Tien, Chaozu, they all kind of go by the wayside, even Piccolo midway through DBZ. But the great thing about Yu Yu Hakusho is you've got your core 4 characters, Yusuke, Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei, and throughout the series they always seem to have something to do, something noteworthy, and they all have their moments. Growing up, everybody loves the main character, so Yusuke is awesome, and I love drawing him, and he's great. But I liked all of these characters almost equally, but I did really enjoy Kurama's character. I liked the intelligence that Kurama always brought, and I loved Yoko Kurama. So he probably was my favorite if I had to pick one, but again, it's so difficult to pick just because it's such a well-balanced team. Even Genkai, I love Master Genkai, and I loved her dynamic between her and Yusuke, the student teacher relationship. Even the way she interacts with the rest of the characters, like Kuwabara is basically a student of hers as well, so it's interesting to see her interacting with everybody, and calling Yusuke a dimwit now and again is always funny. And you can't really think about Genkai without bringing up the Netflix series that just came out, which I did watch, and I would give it a solid 6.5, 7 out of 10. And the reason I bring this up when I'm speaking about Master Genkai is I didn't like the way that she was handled in the show, and I'm not going to spoil anything. But I didn't like the way that she was handled in the show, and I know my brothers and I talked about it afterwards, and they agreed with me on it. What I did think was cool was I really liked how strong the first few episodes of the series were, especially the first episode when I wasn't really sure what to expect. So I liked how the first episode seemed to really reflect the spirit of the anime, and that's what kept me watching, and then I just wanted to see it through until the end. But of course the anime will always be a masterpiece, and the Netflix series was never going to compare to that. So I would suggest that if you're a fan of Yu Yu Hakusho, you should check out the Netflix series. I really liked the guy who played Yusuke. The actor who played Yusuke, I thought really nailed it. So there's some great things about the show, and I'm not saying it's not good or you shouldn't watch it. You definitely should check it out if you're a fan, or even if you're just a fan of anime and maybe you haven't seen Yu Yu Hakusho, but maybe seeing it in live action will cause people to be interested enough to jump back into the series that started it all. And I think that's a good thing, because prior to this series coming out, the last few years, or not the last few years, many years in the past. And I feel like this was more of an obscure anime that many people kind of slept on or didn't talk about. So it is cool to see a series like this be made into live action for Netflix, because it will allow people to further appreciate the manga or the anime. Okay, and now I'm adding some ripped effects to Yusuke's belt. Just trying to give him kind of a slight battle damage look. I decided I didn't want to do any blood or anything like that on Yusuke, so it's just a little bit of ripping on the wristbands, the belt, and of course the ripped sleeves. I think many people would probably guess, just from looking at this drawing, that I was going for Yusuke versus younger Toguro. But I actually didn't really have a specific fight from the Dark Tournament in mind. I was more just trying to capture Yusuke's look from the Dark Tournament. So, because Yusuke has a lot of great fights during the Dark Tournament. He fights Chu, he fights Jin, and then of course he has the epic battle with younger Toguro. But I just really like the Dark Tournament look for Yusuke, as well as that story. Many people consider the Dark Tournament arc to be the best arc in Yu Yu Hakusho, and some people will even argue that it's the best tournament arc in all of anime, and I think I would say that. They do a really good job with the stakes of it all, the execution of the story, all of the battles feel important. The only other tournament arc that I would probably say is close, and it's not really a specific tournament, but any of the world tournament arcs from the original Dragon Ball are also really well done. But I've always had a soft spot for the Dark Tournament especially. I'm starting to mess around with some colors and trying to figure out which colors I want to use. You can see, I know this is moving pretty fast with the time lapse, but what I do when I'm trying to color things and I want them to be the exact colors of what I'm referring to, I'll go over into that subview window. There's a little ink dropper, and I think it's the tool that's selected by default in Clip Studio Paint, but basically what you do is, if you want the exact color of something, you just put your pen over that part of the drawing and it will fetch the color that you're trying to use. And this is not a perfect system. Like, there's definitely times where I'll want a certain, let's say, use case skin tone, and I'll be like, alright, I'll just use the one in the subview window. But then when I click on it and fill the area on my actual drawing, it looks different. So I kind of use it more so as a guide, as a starting point, I guess you would say. So I'll select the color, see what it looks like, and then I'll just manually adjust it until it looks correct to me when I'm trying to figure out what colors I'm going to use. And usually I'll start by trying to do the lightest shade first. So first, and then I just go from there. So I'll just kind of be like, alright, what's the lightest color that we're going to use on this shirt? And then I'll usually do at least a light and medium layer. Sometimes I'll do 3. So I'll have a light layer, a medium layer, and a dark layer. So I'll just kind of start with the lightest one, adjust it so that it's slightly darker but visible and can be seen. And then I'll go for that darkest layer and make it even darker, just to try to have that contrast and make it so that the person looking at the drawing can actually see that I've shaded it. And even though I'm actively shading and coloring this drawing, there are definitely times where I take a break and come back to the drawing like a day later, 2 days later, and I'll kind of say to myself, like, I don't know if I like the way I shaded that, or maybe I'll see something in the actual line art that I need to fix, and it's not uncommon for me to do that and then be like, okay, let me just delete these layers that I've started coloring with and redo it. And you're actually going to see me do that here just in a minute or two, as I continue to figure out what I'm trying to do with this belt. You can see I'm messing around and being like, what looks correct to me, and does that look like the light would come from that direction, those sort of things. So you'll see that I continue here to try to figure some stuff out, especially the hair. That part is actually always difficult for me, to try to get those streaks in Yusuke's hair and make them look believable. And the reason I even bring this up is because it's just very important as an artist to be able to make a mistake and not feel like you ruin the drawing, which I know is not always possible when you do something with traditional media, but in digital art it can be very forgiving. So I'm making adjustments here as we speak, where I don't think his head is exactly big enough, so I'm using the lasso tool and the vector layer to change that around, make his head slightly bigger, and I feel like it looks better, so then I continue with that part of the drawing. Now you'll see me kind of refining the line art. There's some areas of the line art that I felt like looked messy, so I'm kind of just examining the drawing, going in and trying to fix what I think needs fixing. I'm also adjusting the belt here because I didn't think that it looked correct the way that it was before, so I'm adding like a wavy line there, and then I'm going back in and actually I'm using what I already shaded because I decided I liked the way it looked, and I'm just kind of fixing where when I adjusted the size of Yusuke's head, it leaves blanks in those layers. So I'm kind of just recoloring those areas and making sure that everything looks good before I move on to additional shading and coloring. You can see I'm adding some details to the hairstyle with Yusuke here, and this is Yusuke's classic hairstyle, the slick back, greasy look. But in some of the other reference images, and anyone who's seen the show knows that there's various points in the story where, for whatever reason, Yusuke has his hair down, more of like bangs in his face, and I almost did that here. I really like that look for Yusuke. I remember as a kid thinking, like, why doesn't he always have his hair in this style? It looks so much cooler, at least in my opinion. But here, I just wanted it to look similar to how most people would see Yusuke when they think of him, which is with the slick back hair. Now I'm in the home stretch of the Yusuke part of the drawing almost being done. So what I'm doing is I'm adding this third shading layer, which I just usually call like darkest. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to use that darkest layer to give the drawing some depth and make the drawing look more believable with regards to that right leg showing that it's further back, as well as the right arm showing it's further back than the left side. Now at this point the Yusuke drawing is pretty much done. The only thing I have to figure out is how to do the spirit energy effect, and this is something that I did not know how to do prior to trying to tackle this drawing. So the solution came when I went to udemy.com. And I'm not affiliated with Udemy at all, but I do use them often for various online courses, a lot of them being art courses. I just really like their plans that they have as far as which courses they offer, and everything is relatively inexpensive. So I use them often, and I really enjoy their site. They have a class on how to color within Clip Studio Paint, and I'll link in the description for that for you guys. But basically I learned how to do this effect that I'm doing right now from that course on Udemy, so it was valuable for me. It's always great when you can figure out how to do something from either from buying a course on the internet or even from using YouTube to find a tutorial on how to do something and then implementing it into your drawing. So it's a great feeling when you're able to accomplish that. I ended up deciding that I wanted to have the spirit energy aura kind of slightly, just very slightly, surround Yusuke's entire body. So what you're going to see me do now is, after I kind of figure out this hand situation, I'm starting to airbrush the same sort of color around Yusuke. And I think I ended up doing two different colors to try to add a glowing effect. There's a way to add a glowing effect too that I did implement in this drawing, which involves you making a layer, a screen layer, and then making another layer called add and another layer called add glow. And it's basically just the screen layer is duplicated and then changed into an add layer, duplicated again and then changed into an add glow. And it can give you a nice glowing effect, but you do have to have a dark background for it to work well. Another thing I wanted to accomplish with this spirit energy aura around Yusuke is I didn't want it to look like it was just behind him. So what I ended up doing was adding something called an overlay layer, and then I can go on top of Yusuke's skin and it makes it look like it's surrounding him more so than just being directly behind him. Now I'm at background time, which is fun for me because I'm almost done with the drawing and I am at a point where I like how everything's looking, that I feel like I can finish it off with the background. And a background is usually the last thing I do. I know a lot of times people will do that first, but for me, it's the last thing that I do. For this Yusuke background, I thought it'd be really cool to add some speed lines. So I got the speed lines from the Clip Studio Paint asset store. There's a lot of free resources that you can download from their store, and I ended up just slightly angling it so it looks like the speed lines are going in the same direction that Yusuke is traveling through the air as he's like jumping to do the spirit shotgun. And adding the speed lines is something that I just really love about manga panels, especially in Dragon Ball art. Akira Toriyama uses speed lines all the time, and he uses it masterfully. So I wanted to do my own version of that here. And you'll see I'm gonna start to figure out what exactly I want to do here with the background. What I ended up deciding for the lettering is Yusuke is a manga anime character, and I thought it would be really cool to write his name in Japanese lettering. The only problem is I don't speak Japanese at all. So after much research and Googling, I figured out that if I turn my computer into Japanese mode, and I think you have to download the Japanese language through Windows. After you do that, you also have to find fonts that will actually show up when you type in Japanese. So that was very difficult to figure out how to do the first time. But then once I got it, now I know how to do it. So it's in my skill set. After that, you have to figure out how to say Yusuke Urameshi properly in Japanese. You can't just type Yusuke Urameshi in English and have the proper kanji show up. So that was also a process that was difficult to figure out, but I got there. So now I'm in the home stretch of the drawing, and you can see I'm trying to figure out the layout for the Yu Yu Hakusho logo as well as the Yusuke lettering, and I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. This was so much fun to do, and I appreciate you guys for watching.
Hey! Forgetting something stupid! Maybe I didn't make myself clear! Shotgun!
I hope you guys enjoyed that soundbite of Yusuke actually using the shotgun technique from the anime. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and please consider subscribing to my channel. If you'd like to see more Yu Yu Hakusho projects from me in the future, please let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to see other anime characters, please feel free to comment and let me know which characters you'd like to see me draw. Thanks, guys.